At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Ja.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another session of Focus on Liberia. I am Gabriel Carter, your host, here with the usual suspect co-host today. I have Alex in the studio with me. I also have Larry in the back. Should be joining us shortly. Today is Saturday. As always, we're going to take an hour, 30 minutes to talk about our topic today. Wherever you are, please do share the show with your followers. And as we always say, bring your comment, bring your questions, and let's have a great discussion. Today's topic is going to be about bonds. Bonds meaning the debt instrument. How can it be leveraged for development? You know, how is it issued for development? So that's what's going to be our topic today. And as always, it's a pleasure having you here. Larry, Alex, hopefully you can hear us now, right?
Yeah, I can hear you, and I'm sure you can hear me too.
There we go. So guys, welcome.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Gabriel.
But
Hey, Alex. Can you guys
I'm
hear
moving
me?
from one computer system to the other, so it's kind of dicey right now. So if this
Yes.
one let me down, then that's it. But I'll be on for a while.
Yeah, you are perfect right now. We can hear you. So, Larry, you're on.
Yeah, you guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
All right, just wanted to make sure my audio was working properly. So, yeah, glad to be on FOL as usual with my partners in communications, partners in finance and economics, Alex and Gabriel. So, yeah, important topic today, discussing bonds. If you want to know why so many countries in Africa are poor, especially in ECOWAS, the ECOWAS region, you want to know what the election should be all about. It's all about raising money to finance some of the big projects a lot of the candidates are talking about. The one thing everyone should be asking them, how are you going to pay for it? Everyone got all this great idea, you know, they're going to build a spaceship and send it over to the moon, but they can't tell you how they're going to pay for it. So this is an important conversation. Anyone who's planning to be president, if they can't tell you how they're going to pay for the big initiatives they have in mind, then they're just selling you a pipe dream. So great conversation we're going to have today discussing this topic.
Yeah. So it's last week I went this alone. It was tough, man. you don't understand how easy it is to have other people here. You know, until you actually get on to do an entire show by yourself, and then you realize, oh man, I am in the house. So it was. I'm glad having you guys back. You know, so but let's get into it.
You gotta learn from Anthony.
I know he's very.
A loner. he goes it alone.
I didn't realize until I got on. I said, man, this guy is really, he knows his stuff. You know, like I was fumbling. At one point, I was fumbling trying to figure out how to stay consistent with it, and then, but I kind of wing it, to be honest with you. Wow. And then you go back to people like Anthony who does it day in, day out. And you realize, man, this guy knows his stuff, but you see it every day, so you don't appreciate that until you're put in front of the mic. Yeah.
Well, at least you had your baptism by fire. But let's swing into the topic, and I would just play an asking question role here.
Yeah.
So in everything, since we're talking about bonds, especially bonds, the way the topic is crafted, bond issuance of bond for development, and Larry talked about, he linked it to elections and Kennedy's financing the big dreams. So, Larry, I just wanted to start off with you in that respect in terms of Kennedy funding the big dreams. When you say the big dreams, are you talking about the how to fund the elections and or how they fund the promises they make, the items on their manifesto, if you may?
One of the reasons why you have so many Liberians in the diaspora not coming back to Liberia is because Liberia has a poor healthcare system. The ratio of doctors to patients, it's anywhere between 15,000 to 17,000 to 1. And I believe the United Nations is saying that it should be under 5,000. So it's ridiculous. We don't have good healthcare system. How do you finance the healthcare system to bring doctors in there? How do you finance JFK? How do you finance the other hospitals? There's about 177 hospitals and clinics, small little clinics around Liberia. How do you pay for it? You can't pay for everything directly out of your revenue. Countries tend to borrow money to pay for it. This is why when Liberia try to borrow money using two scam artists like Eton and the guy from Burkina Faso, the guy who runs a company in Burkina Faso, Iboma MF, something like that.
Yeah,
that's why Liberia couldn't finance any. They can't finance anything because they can't raise the money. They can't borrow the money. Yeah. So any candidate out there that's saying, "Hey, we're going to improve the education system," how are you going to pay for the computers to put in school? How are you going to renovate the schools? Where are you going to get the money from? You're not going to get it directly out of the revenue. The revenue is not enough.
Yeah.
You say you're going to improve the healthcare sector. How are you going to get the money? You want to improve the telecommunications to bring internet. Where are you going to get the money from? People need to tell us where they're going to get the money from, because right now this government is only getting the money from the IMF.
Yeah.
That's no way to develop an economy. IMF has never successfully led a country through development phases. So when I talk about how they're going to pay for this stuff, the stuff I'm talking about include all of the big audacious ideas they have out there. How are they going to pay for it? Where are they going to get the money from? You cannot get it from a $550 million revenue base. Never, ever, ever going to happen. So where are they going to get the money from? You got to raise money through sovereign debt instrument, through bonds. That's how you got to raise the money. So we had never had a plan to raise money. He doesn't have anyone on his team that has any deep investment banking experience or finance experience to tell you how they're going to raise the money. That's why they never managed to raise any serious capital. They even passed into law, Eton, to show you how unsophisticated the government was to not be able to vet a non-existent Singaporean company. What's it for Singapore? Where was Eton from?
Yeah, I think they did establish in Singapore, and then they got bought from there. I think they got bought from there, and then
they transferred to another country.
They tried. Yeah,
Japan or somewhere else.
Yeah, I think so.
How do you guys would pay for it? The next time anyone talk about it, hey, we're going to build roads from here to Alaska or from wherever. How are you going to pay for those roads? It requires money. Where are you going to get the money from?
Today, I mean, the difference with that development can be financed. Today, we'll be focusing on leveraging bonds for development. But sometimes people talk about before I move to Gabriel with the definition of bonds, the different types of bonds and stuff like that. I just wanted to lay a little background based on the way you asked the question, which will fit into what we're discussing here. Some people talk about the private sector led growth. You got to bring the private sector in. So there could be different types of financing dollar development projects and stuff. So how do you compare the private sector situation versus raising funds through bonds and other instruments and things like that?
Is that question posed to me or Larry?
To Larry, but you can jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, private. So no country. I said this one time, and the Minister of Finance and even my man Lester Tenney saying it's not possible. Look, No country has ever developed without a strong financial sector, meaning the private sector. The private sector, right now, Alex, if you wanted to start a business, it's rare that you will, if you want to start a serious business, it's rare that you will come up with all of the cash to start that business. You need a way to borrow that money. And in order to borrow that money, you need to be able to issue, in some instance, bonds. And Gabriel's going to define bonds. He put out a fantastic PowerPoint slide. You cannot develop any country without a strong financial sector. Financial sector has some key elements, very key elements. One is a way to get money from people who want to save it, people who are putting it in the bank, to get it over to people who want to invest it, the entrepreneur. And I saw a young couple on Costa Show yesterday coming out with an innovative ideas for transportation. So it's entrepreneurs like that need money to develop their ideas. There's so many Liberians in the diaspora, so many Liberians back home that have investment ideas. So you need financial instruments to get money from people who are saving it. So that's how the private sector also uses bonds to a certain extent.
Yeah.
You know, so, but there's so much that has to be done in the background to develop the system to get it done. And it was never done over the past 5 years. I'm sorry to say, I didn't see it being done over the past 5 years. You know.
So Gabriel, thank you, Larry. Gabriel, many times we hear about stocks and bonds, and today we are people. One would think that at that level, one would think that okay, I'm putting my money somewhere for it to grow, for some future benefits or for retirement and or things like that. But today we'll explore how a country could leverage bonds for development. So. I know we'll come to the definition of bonds, but let's look at stocks and bonds. So when you hear the word stocks and bond, what's the difference between stock and bonds?
So that is a great question, and I think the way I like to put it, so stocks are literally what we call equity. So with stocks, if you buy a stock of a company, you're buying a percentage of that company. So that's an equity, right? Whereas a bond is a debt. So it's a debt that has to get paid back. Whereas if I buy a stock in your company, I'm taking part of that company. So that's the biggest difference between the two. So in I would say, I don't like to speak in general, but in the United States, the bonds market is the biggest financial market. It trumps I think it's twice the size of the stock market. But it's so fixed that a lot of people don't concentrate on it. We all of us just focus on the stock market, but it's twice the size of the stock market. So whatever value you can put on the stock market, the bond market is twice as that. And that's because I think Larry pointed that out. Companies, right? Companies have issue bonds, government, even the city down to the city, from your state to your cities, they issue bonds. That's how they're so big that we call them municipality bonds. So that bonds in essence is a debt that is issued, whereas stock market is an equity, which this is the reason why they call it the equity market. So that's
can countries buy stock or buy ownership in companies? Countries like Liberia, can Liberia buy shares or stocks, if you may, in companies?
Yes, you can do that. I mean, it won't be countries do that, but they do that through, we might be getting off tangent here. They do that through what we call sovereign wealth fund, right? So the Norway sovereign wealth fund, right? So they invest their money with the Carlyle Group, the Blackstone, the Goldman Sachs, and those companies instead take those countries' sovereign money, which is the country give to them to invest for them, and those companies end up buying shares into other companies as well, right? So in essence, yes, a country can do that, but it's usually indirectly, right? So indirectly, yes, but directly, no.
The reason why I'm asking that question, because this is something that Liberia could take advantage of. For example, say we have an example with this topic, leveraging bonds for development.
Mhm.
Ghana and Africa's example, but I go back to Ghana. When Ghana floated the portion of their ownership in Ashanti gold fields,
Mhm.
and then they traded that on the stock on the New York Stock Exchange, on the
Mhm.
English Stock Exchange, and that gave, some of those effort gave rise to a stock exchange in Accra.
Mhm.
So what Ghana was doing at that time was, okay, uh, the Republic of Ghana owns this gold mining company.
Yeah.
So let's use portion of our ownership and invite people to buy shares into this company and pay us actual, money,
Mhm. Mhm.
millions of dollars.
Right.
So how do you compare that? How, and how Liberia as a country can leverage some of that?
I mean, in that case, it would be as if you're, I suppose, I'm not very familiar with the case, but I suppose they actually do, the state, which is the country, did have ownership in the the gold mines, right? Or the company
Mhm.
that owned the gold mine,
Yeah.
right? Which in essence become a state-owned enterprise, right? So that is as if you're taking a state-owned enterprise that has this you know, supplies of gold and taking it public. So let's say you have the country own half of the golds that that company produces, that's their own enterprise produces, right? So they, in other words, they're selling the other half on the stock market. It can be done, but again, as I said, and we can differ on that until maybe somebody show me something credible and I will change my mind on that. I won't recommend that is a great idea, but in essence, like you said, in Ghana cases worked, right? Because they use it to catapult into something else, which was the development of their stock market, which is now they're continuing to use to raise capital for companies. So in that case, they had a long-term goal. Um, if a country is going to do it, maybe one or two state-owned enterprises, but I won't just do it with all the existing state-owned enterprises that are in the country. So in actually, it's a yes or no question. Yes, they can do it, but no, I wouldn't do it to an extent where you are, just putting all your state-owned enterprises on the stock market. Right.
If Larry has nothing to then I mean, if Larry has nothing to add, then let's go into our topic for the day: the bonds for leveraging bonds for development.
Yeah. So let
Now let's
me
look at the definition of bonds. What is
right.
bond?
Okay. So I think I may have touched on that a little bit, but let me share this. Maybe I am. Okay. So what is bond? In essence, what I said earlier. So bond is pretty much an instrument of debt, that a company can issue or a government can use to raise money. So pretty much you lending money to the company or government, and the government or company then takes that money to go and do whatever they want to do with it, whether they want to build a school, build a bridge, or whatever they decide to do with it, right? So that is basically what a bond is. A bond is a debt instrument. So we have a little chart on the board here, a slide on the board here, right? So let's say you invested $10,000 into a company, right? Into a government. You lend $10,000 to a government. That's because the government issuing you bonds, right? The government then takes that $10,000 to do whatever they want to do with it. But in returns, they give you what's called interest, right? For them taking that money, right? They give you interest and they're going to pay you that interest over a certain period of time. Let's say every 6 months. Some government will do every 6 months. So every 6 months, you get a coupon payment, say 5% or whatever it is. And then at the end of the duration, which is the time of the bond is being issued, you get your principal investment. So you'll get that initial $10,000 back plus whatever interest that is owed to you. So that is practically how bond is actually used, issued on the market. So in essence, that's what a bond is. A bond is just a debt instrument. So you pretty much just lending money to the government for them to do what they want to do with it. Yeah. So that's definitely what a bond is. Yeah. I mean, you guys can add to that as well.
So then, what are the different types of bonds? I will. What are the different types of bond? Let's tie it in. Then I can ask some questions.
Okay, so I think we have another slide on here. So the types of bonds we have: government bonds. These are usually backed. I think, as Larry mentioned earlier, the government, like sovereign government, like Liberia, can issue a bond. Well, I take that back. United States can issue the bond. Japan, the Ivory Coast, Ghana. Those are what we call government bond or sovereign bonds, right? And we also have the quasi bonds. Those are just issued by uh, you know local government, right? So local government, municipality, or state or city government can issue bonds. And we have the corporate bond, right? So, like, perfect example, back in 2012, I think 2011, GE was issuing bond. I think it was 10 or something. I forgot the amount. At the time, they were issuing the bond. Their stock price was shooting. I still remember that
What
because
is
I lost.
GE?
General Electric, the
Oh, that's
company.
the company.
So,
Okay.
right. So they were issuing a bond, right? At the time, their stock price were actually at $16 a share. For me, I just thought this is a big company that existed for so long and they're not going anywhere. But in essence, they end up using that bond so well that it revived them, and now they're trading higher. So companies do issue bonds, government issue bonds. Um, I think we had on there emerging markets for emerging market, which is countries such as ours, like the Ghana, the Ivory Coast, the Liberia, and the Brazil, the Russia, China. All of those can issue bonds as well. So those are the
But
types of bonds.
Gabriel, every time you come to Liberia, you kind of hesitate and you want to take it back. Why you do that? Liberia is not
You
capable of
guys,
issuing bonds.
we will get into that. We'll get into that. Why I always bite my tongue when it comes into when we get to that. We'll get into that. I don't want to get ahead of us. Yeah, but we can. In essence, we can. We're not there. Let's to be honest, what I said, we're not there. That's it. Yeah.
So let's look at the mechanics of issuing a bond. Say it's a debt instrument. So these are piece of papers, passing around, right? So
Mm-hmm.
say a municipality wants to raise money, right? It's all about raising money. So they issue a bond. How does that work? How does the municipality, say the city of which city do you live in? That city decides to issue to raise money. How does that work? How is it priced? What's the mechanics?
Okay, so I think we have another slide here. Hopefully this is it. Okay, so hopefully we can do a good job explaining this. So how are bonds actually priced, right? Hopefully I think you guys can see the slide clearly. So we have price versus yield. So bonds are actually priced at either par value meaning it's face value on the bond is, let's say, as we have in the example here, it's $1,000, and it's being quoted for 100, right? So in essence, it's equal at par. So fair value. So that means that you're not getting a discount or you're not paying a premium, right? So you can also buy a premium, right? So at premium, that means you're paying it over the face value of the bond, right? You can also buy it at discount, meaning, let's say the bond is quoted for $970, but the face value on that is $1,000 if you go trade it in. So that means you're buying it for a discount. So in addition to whatever interest rate you're getting on that, you're also getting it at a discount, right? So as I said, it can be traded at par, which is fair value. So the only thing you could buy at face value, so the only thing you'll probably be getting is just the interest payment. You can buy it at a discount, or in some cases you buy it at a premium. And now if you're buying a bond at a premium, your hope is that at the time of trading, as the time of exchange, a value has gone up, right? Or you're just capitalizing on the interest rate. The interest rate on that is so high that you don't mind buying it at a premium that over time the interest rate payment that you're going to be getting will uh you know will weigh out the premium that you pay for it. So in essence, you still win, So that's how these things are priced. Now, in terms of how they're calculated, that's a whole different math that, I don't think we have time to get into. But that, in essence, that's how they are priced. So you can buy at par value, which is face value. You can buy it at a discount. You can buy it at a premium. In essence, if you're going to buy a bond, you want to hope that you're buying it at a discount, right?
So I'm just looking at a way the layman could understand it. So the city of Dallas decides to issue bonds.
Right.
They can people we know that people issue bonds or government issue bonds for different reasons, to build bridges, because we say bonds, leveraging bonds for development, right?
Mm-hmm.
So development could be bridges, it could be building hospitals, it could be improving your water system, your electricity system, it could be improving your school system. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to raise capital to do that, right?
Right.
Now, and then people have to literally bring their money to earn
Right.
money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I'm bringing $100,000 to buy this piece of paper to
Right.
give the city of Dallas money,
Right.
and the city of Dallas give me a piece of paper, say at this value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know I'm paying this money for the benefit of the city, so that for the benefit of the citizen when this project is done. But
Mm-hmm.
what do I get in return?
Okay, so back in the days, they used to give you a piece of paper, like
Mm-hmm.
back in 2015 when I still used to work retail. Like you used to see people coming in with a piece of paper that tell you whether this is E series bond. They will have the series on it that their parent or grandparent bought for them, and it's like somebody just handed to them as a gift. And those people didn't understand what it was. They would just go to the bank and say, "I want to cash it." So in essence, back in the days, they used to give you a piece of paper that they issued to you that you can just keep as evidence of you paying for that. Nowadays, everything is done electronically. I think we have a slide on there, but we'll get to that later. So let's say you want to the city, whatever city that you're in, or whatever government that country that you're in, right? They
Mm-hmm.
want to issue a bond. There's depending what kind of country. Let's say since we're speaking to the African context or Liberian context, right? If Liberia wanted to issue a bond, the first thing they will have to do is to go to the people what we call brokers,
Mm-hmm.
bookies. So bookies meaning the bankers. Like say you might go to the Wall Street. I mean not Wall Street Journal. The Morgan Stanley, the Goldman Sachs, or um, any other major banks out there that can help people issue that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you bring in those people, what they're trying to help you do is to have not just the backing, but help you get enough what we call subscribers, right? So you can say, I run Liberia. I want to issue a bond for because I want to build an entire road network around the city, around the country for $2 billion. And you call in uh, Goldman Sachs, and their representative to Liberia is Larry. So Larry showed up in your office and say, okay, so you want to raise $2 billion to build a network of roads around the country. You say yes. And Larry said, okay. So the first thing they're going to do is determine how much you want to raise. Once you determine that, then you're going to garner what we call garner of support, because people in Liberia, how much money are they going to buy so much? So you want to garner of support from the international market, right? First, you got to determine which currency you want to issue it in. Definitely, we're not going to use Liberian dollars because nobody will want to invest in it. So you might say, well, use the euro dollar, or we can use the United States dollars. So you determine that. The next thing you're going to determine is how much yield. Yield meaning how much interest rate you're going to pay out people. Also, how long? Because the longer people give you their money and the longer their money stay with you, the higher interest rate they're going to charge. The shorter the time period of you holding on to somebody's money, they lower the interest rate. So you're going to have to make that decision now. So Larry will help you now and say, $2 billion. Do you want to issue this bond for 30, 30 years or 20 years or whatever a year? So you and Larry will sit down because he has the brain behind it, and he will say, hey, these are the best option. This is what this country has done. This is what the other country has done. Once you guys have decided that, you're taking that on a roll now. You as the president or the investment commission president of the country, you put a whole road show together to say, not only am I going to the diaspora around the country, around the world, I'm going to market this thing to not just the diaspora, but to other investment banks, other countries that will subscribe to it, to make sure that I end up raising the $2 billion that I set out to raise. Once that is achieved, then, because sometimes, let's say you even say you want to raise $2 billion, you can do a good road show. And because there are factors, I think Larry always talked about this on his show, because your credit rating, not everybody will be able to, you may not be able to raise the entire $2 billion, right? So let's say you go on a roadshow, you put on a good roadshow, you're expecting for your country to raise $2 billion. But in essence, you only end up subscription of $1.5 billion. So all these companies and investment banks actually pitch in. So initially, let's say I pitch in, my bank said we wanted to subscribe with $100 million worth. If you do get to $2 billion subscription, we will buy $100 million worth. But because you don't get there, you now as a country would tell me, Gabriel, your banks wanted to buy $100 million worth of bonds, but because we didn't get there, and we want to make sure everybody who subscribe to this thing get a fair share, we're only going to give you, let's say, an 80 million, 70 million, or whatever it is. So you determine that amount after the roadshow, right? After that, you go to the servicing, which every time, the reason why I kept hesitating when you said Liberia, and I would cringe, you have to have the mechanism in place to service bonds, those kind of bonds. Now, in our case, you can say we have the central bank, but let's say if Liberians do subscribe to that, or outside companies or whatever do subscribe to that, how are you going to pay it? How are you going to pay that? Do we have enough manpower to be able to service $2 billion worth of bonds and sending out payment every whatever amount? What is it? Every 3 months or every 6 months, every year you're sending out payment. Do you have enough manpower to be able to do that? So in essence, I hope I didn't drag on too long, and I hope I answered the question. In essence,
what we could do
that
at
is the
this point
process.
Yeah, Gabriel,
Right.
what we could do at this point is, Larry, if you bear with me, why don't you go into the presentation? Maybe let's use the next 5-10 minutes into the presentation. Maybe then after that we can have a conversation around the presentation.
Let me touch on a couple of things real quick before we bounce to the presentation. So in just plain layman terms, a bond is like an IOU.
Yep.
Okay. Anything where you're transferring something to me, I'm coming over to you to borrow money, and I'm giving you something in return. That's an IOU. It's a financial instrument. It's a bond. Liberia have issued bonds in the past, but have been relying more on treasury bills, on CBL bills. Let me give you an example for people to understand why this is important. At one time, the president came out and declared that there was going to be free tuition at the University of Liberia. You all remember that? Did he also explain how he was going to pay for that?
No, not at all.
No. The president of Ghana made similar statement. To pay for that, they raised almost 100 million. If I may be mistaken, but they raised almost 100 million in bonds to pay for it. I mean, the fact that Ghana is in a debt crisis is another story. We can probably talk about that. But the president came out and he explained how he was going to pay for that. So the way how they were going to pay for that was to go to the debt market and issue bonds to pay for it. So you have a lot of Liberian politicians that will come and make some ridiculous statement. We're going to do this. They're not going to tell you how they're going to pay for it. And then they try to pay for it directly out of the budget, which doesn't make any sense, right? The way how you determine the price of a bond is very complicated. For example, if I'm going to lend money to, let's say, the CEO, Dennis Jacques, and in the past, Dennis, who has always paid his bills, he missed one payment to me. There's a risk now that Dennis can miss other payments to me. Because he's missed payments to me, I would see that as a risk.
Yep.
As a result, the cost of him borrowing now will increase. So the price of a bond is also based on the risk of somebody paying you back. Will you be willing right now to lend money to the government of Liberia? You think the government of Liberia has enough money that they may not default on a debt, that it will pay it? That's a risk. If you if you lend money to the government of Liberia, how do you lend money to them? By buying the CBL bills. When you buy the CBL bills, you're lending money to the government. So whenever that happens, that's how, you can borrow, you can lend money. And the U.S. government does it all the time. There's only been 1 year in the U.S. government history where the U.S. government hasn't borrowed money to balance its budget. They always run a deficit. I think it was back in 1970 or 1971. But other than that, they always borrow money. Who did they borrow money from? They issue debt, they issue bonds. And who did they issue their bonds? Ireland, Japan, China. China is a big holder. I believe Ireland lends more money to the U.S. government. But the problem with Liberia is, so you see in the ECOWAS region, there are 5 countries. The problem in Liberia is we don't have a credit rating. When you look at the countries in Africa that have credit ratings, take the island nation of Cabo Verde, off the east coast of Senegal. Cabo Verde, little small island nation, population.
The English name Cape Verde.
Cape Verde.
Portuguese is a Portuguese island.
Yeah, it is.
Right. Yeah. They're part of the ECOWAS. They have a credit rating. I think that credit rating on Moody's is like around a B, maybe B plus.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Then you have countries like Burkina Faso.
They're trading tourism and fish.
They're big on tourism. Yeah. Why is it that you think Burkina Faso is a risk if you were to lend money to Burkina Faso? They have coup d'etat.
Political upheaval, instability.
Always.
One of the few countries where there was a coup within a coup. It's ridiculous. So determining how to price a bond is based on how quickly you're going to get your money back. The shorter the term, the more likely you're going to get your money back. The lower the risk, so that it's priced more favorably. If you have good governance is also an important for sovereign debt. I'm not talking about personal, buying corporate bonds, and that's something we're talking about. But for sovereign debt, you have to look at the governance. The reason why is
sovereign debt is more of the country issuing the debt.
Yes, right. But how has Liberia done on the Millennium Challenge Corporation in terms of governance?
Poorly.
They're done poorly. That's why they can't win the MCC compact. That also plays a part in terms of how you're pricing your bond. So there are so many factors that determine the price. If the wealth in the country, is improving, you will have favorite pricing. Bottom line, bonds are priced based on supply and demand. Plain and simple, it's based on supply and demand. If there's a higher demand for a government bond, absolutely the price will increase. And there are several factors that help in determining that. But every country that tried to build, that has a development agenda, they need to have some debt ratings. There are 4 debt rating agencies, but people tend to look at 3 of them. There are 3 major ones are Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor. Right? Those are the major ones. Yeah, those major guys, they put out ratings each year in order to determine how to price your bond. For example, back in 2002, I can remember there was a crisis in Japan. Japan had a serious financial crisis, and Japan debt rating was lowered to the level of Botswana. Japan got pissed off. Japan said, "Well, why are you guys lowering credit rating to that of a developing country in Africa?" They got pissed off, but it was because they had financial crisis. Hong Kong, remember a few years ago, there have been massive protests in Hong Kong because of issues related to China. I believe it was Fitch, not Fitch. I believe it was Moody's or one of the debt rating agencies that lowered Hong Kong's credit rating. Hong Kong got pissed off. They got pissed off. Liberia has no credit rating, and the reason Liberia has no credit rating is because why? We defaulted on our debt. Went back in 2000 and 2008, 2009.
That made
When
it
was it
wiped
that
out. When it wiped
yeah,
out. Yeah,
it got
2010
wiped
it got
out?
wiped out, I think. Right.
Roughly, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 billion in debt that got wiped out. It
Yeah.
was great, but there's also a price.
Yeah.
Because now the international community will be afraid to lend you money. Why? Because
Exactly.
you defaulted on your debt in the past. And even right now, the money they're borrowing from the
IMF.
yeah, the money they're getting from the World Bank and other agencies, from the IMF, there's also an issue with it because they're not meeting certain threshold. When you read the IMF report, they're not meeting certain threshold. So it also increases the risk of lending money to them. I mean, you can't, and when I say you cannot develop a country without having bonds or without having financial instrument, not just bonds, financial instrument. Some of the people in the government who are totally unsophisticated, who never work in investment banking, just think I'm just talking stuff because I want to talk about this stuff. But you cannot develop a country without a strong financial system. That would include the regulatory agencies. There's a reason why we have the SEC finding people consistently for trying to scam people. We don't have good regulatory agencies in Liberia, right? So right now, Alex, Gabriel, if you guys want to buy a U.S. Treasury securities, you can go to a website called Treasury Direct.
Yep.
You go to Treasury Direct, you can buy U.S. government securities. And just go to Treasury Direct, fill it out. And the reason why people want to lend money to the U.S. government, the U.S. government not going to default on its debt obligation. They've come close, but they're not going to default on it. So this is so important. Every politician out there talking about development, ask them, where are you going to get the money from? How are you going to make that payment back? Because Ghana got the money, but Ghana wasn't able to make the payments. They missed a payment. And now they're in a major crisis. They're relying right now on the IMF to come and bail them out. As a result, Ghana's bond rating has dropped to CCC. That's like junk status. You need either a AAA, which is like the US government, the government of Canada, even Liechtenstein, some of these countries that have AAA rating. And then you have B, which means you can pay your bills. There's some risk of default. And then you have C, CCC, which means it's junk status. There's a high probability you're not going to make your payments. So Ghana right now has dropped to CCC in all of the ratings and it's bad. So, I love to talk about bonds all day because it was something that I did on Wall Street for about 30 years.
Nice.
And that we can talk about it all day.
Yeah, and that is why, Larry, I wanted to go, right? And then maybe you can bring in a Ghana example about the risk of paying back. Say, since we understand that bonds is about, in this case, we're talking about country issuing bonds, sovereign bonds, right? So a country like Liberia, say if you want to have this $1 billion road construction project for which we were going to Eton and Iboma, even though the corridor that we're talking about developing, it was put around $3 billion over a long period of time. We're trying to get $1 billion. So if Liberia was issuing bonds or treasury bills or whatever through the Central Bank of Liberia to raise $1 billion, and people go and buy and they actually oversubscribe, meaning they get more than $1 billion.
Right.
How risky it is for a country to pay back? How do I get a payback on my investment? Where would the country take money from in the first place when it didn't even have the money to do that project for which it was going to borrow?
Larry, that's an
my friend Alex, that is the $64,000 question, $1 million question. It is so important. Is the reason why you have countries like Ghana in trouble right now because they took their money. They're not able to pay it back. They missed their debt payment. You have so many other countries, including Japan at one time, having similar issue. The key is when you borrow the money, you need to put that money into something that would generate revenue. You need to invest it. It's so critical. What are some of the key areas you can invest in technology, for example? By putting some good money into internet services. USAID came out with a report that says Liberia's GDP can grow anywhere from 2.5 to maybe 3 percentage points just by improving the internet in the country. By improving the internet, you can increase Liberia's GDP. So if you borrow the money, if the country borrows the money and they waste it, on foolishness, on trips, lavish spending, all kind of nonsense.
Corruption.
They would end up corruption.
Yeah.
That's a major issue. They would end up in a debt crisis. The key is when you borrow the money, you need to look at your different feasibility studies and say, okay, where can I put this money that would generate immediate revenue? Boost up the tourism sector. You know, that's an easy sector right there.
But countries would normally do it, their studies and look at where they actually, where they're going to raise the money from. They got to do all that study before issuing those bonds, right?
Yeah. You see, in order to even raise the bonds, you first need to have decent credit ratings. How do you get decent credit ratings? You have to bring the credit rating agencies to your country. When the credit rating agencies come to your country, they're going to ask you, what is the governance structure? If you have a lot of protests in your country, if you have a lot of issues of corruption, you have some key players in your government on sanctions.
Unresolved killings.
Exactly. Those are things that would just kind of, the investors would say, oh, whoa, we can't have this. This is why Burkina Faso, and the thing that kind of troubles me with Burkina Faso, they were once called Upper Volta, right?
Yeah, Upper Volta.
And then they changed their name to Burkina Faso, land of the incorruptible. And they're just as corrupt as they can ever come. But when you invite the credit reporting agencies over to your country, they want to see how you're going to improve your governance. Mm-hmm. What is the rule of law in Liberia? Can you get justice in Liberia? Those are all critical issues. The whole business of bills, if I remember correctly, it came about at the end of the Ebola crisis. The central bank issued a ton of money. It led to immediate spike or devaluation in Liberian dollars. And Madam Sirleaf, and you see, this is why I don't want to be cynical, but I'm going to be cynical for just a minute. I kind of question why, right before Madam Sirleaf left, she issued so many, they went through that whole currency thing to put so much currency on the market. Because whenever you put a lot of currency on the market, I know you see where I'm going with this, right? I remember this years ago. I remember back in college, way in my undergrad studies. I can't remember who it was that made it, but devaluing another country's currency has always been a wartime tactic.
Yeah.
The fact that in 2013, at the end of Ebola, they issued so much currency on the Liberian market because they were trying to revive the economy. But what happened? The Liberian currency devalued. How did Madam Sirleaf fix it? She started issuing central bank bills, T-bills, right, and some bonds, because they used that to mop up the excess currency in the market, which is what the Federal Reserve Bank here in the U.S. That's what they do to mop up excess liquidity. The whole open market committee, they do that. Yeah.
They don't take the money into the markets, right?
No, but then exactly right. In 2018,
they don't take it to Rally Town Market and
you know where I'm going with this. In 2018, you have Steel Team 6, right? You got Steel Team 6 and you're giving them cash dollars. That's why today you have such a mess, because the people that came in didn't come in with any clear understanding of corporate finance, investment banking, how this whole thing worked. No one hands money.
Where they were getting
you don't hand money to people to go do that. That's why right now the only people that subscribe to CDF bills are the major banks in the country right now. What we have, like 6 or 7?
We have about 9, 10.
9.
Yeah,
we had 9 the last time. I think we have 11 here. There were 1 or 2 other banks.
But they need individuals to subscribe to these bills. But individuals are not subscribing to it because it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to lend money to the government in that fashion.
All right. So, and I, before we jump into one of the slides, and I think I wanted to chime in on the Ghana incident, but I just wanted you to land first. And you're right, Ghana is in a serious financial crisis right now. I think that the debt to GDP is about 80%, right? But a country that has a rating, even though they were downgraded, they have a way around it, because if you have the production in your country, you can have a way around it, right? So what they're doing, they're issuing bonds right now, but they're not issuing that on the international market anymore. They're issuing it locally, right? They want to issue we will get to that $3.24 billion. And the way they're going to do it, they're going to start with this 3 months. They're going to go to the 6 months. and then they're going to do a 2 year, and I think they're going to do another 4 years, right? So
Mm-hmm.
because their credit rating is so bad, they don't want to go on the international market. They're doing that locally. So in as much that they're in that crisis right now, they have alternatives, right? They have alternative to go. Hey, if you don't want to take us on the international market, we can do this locally because our people have the money here. There's money in Ghana, so
But let's look at it.
right.
Let's look at the two examples, the Ghana and maybe we can put the slide on the board. You can talk to the two examples, the Ghana and Ivory Coast examples.
Uh, okay, so yeah, so this was a case study that I wanted us to look at, right?
Yeah.
So I think we've been talking about the Ghana case study as well. So with Ghana, they have, as I said, they have a debt problem right now. Last time I checked, I think it was about 3 months ago, their debt to GDP was 80%. So that means for every dollar in revenue the country makes, they owe 80 cents
They
in
owe it. Yeah.
80 cents in debt, right? Their credit rating, I think Larry pointed that out, it was downgraded, right? So they can't
Yeah,
go
it's
on the
at triple
capital market.
C.
You're right, exactly. There you go, to triple C, right? And so what they end up doing in essentially they're issuing $3.24 billion debt, right? They planning on doing that, but what they want to do that on locally, right? And they're going to do this in Ghana City. Ghana City equivalent, I think, is $20 billion, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're doing it in stages, right? Because I think this is the first time, so they're going to do it in stages. As I said earlier, they're going to try the 3 months, and then they're going to go to a 6 months, 182 days. I think it's 6 months, right? And then they go to a 2 years, and then the 48 months. Now, as I said earlier, the longer you have, somebody hold on to your money, the riskier it becomes. The higher interest rate you can attach to that. So the 2 months, the 2 years, the 48, which is the 4 years, will have different interest rate. But this is something they're doing locally because they have no skin in the game on the international market. Same thing with Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast, but it's a different story, right? I think this one will issue with the case was Ivory Coast in 2021, right?
So go back to the dates for Ghana. Is that current to 2022?
2000, yeah, I think, yeah, 2022. I think they're planning on issuing that. It hasn't been
Okay.
issued yet. They're planning on. So initially they started a conversation with the IMF, and I think they're in that discussion. But whether the IMF does or they don't, at least they have an alternative plan just in case the IMF doesn't come through, right? So
Okay.
they think strategically that, hey, we're going to the IMF. They want, I think, $3 billion from the IMF, but the IMF said there's only 1.5 they can give them, but they're pushing for 3. So in case they don't get that 3 from the IMF, hey, they're going to do that locally, and they have the, I said they have the capacity to do that. Whether they're going to be able to raise that $3.424 billion on domestically, that's a whole nother conversation to have. With the Ivory Coast, I think this bond was issued in 2021. It was oversubscribed, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
and it was oversubscribed to right now. I think they're planning on issuing what we call a green bond, specifically targeted towards this whole climate change, right? So they're taking
Mm-hmm.
advantage of that. I think if we can recall, recently the president of Liberia was actually trying to, entice some investment around climate change. So if we had the credit rating, this could have been a good way to do that. So Ivory Coast is on the cups of issuing another green bond as well. But this one that will issue in 2021, there's two phases: $600 million, 4.03%. It matures in 2032, and there's another $250 million that matures in 2048. And again, as I said, because you hold on to the people money for a long time, they charge you higher interest rate. So in
So by
essence,
this time, by 2032, 2048, this money should be due, and they should pay the people back
plus
at their interest rate, with their interest on it, the 4.03%
exactly
interest on it.
right.
So if they're not able to pay at that point, then they're in trouble.
Yep.
then they keep renegotiating, adding more interest on top of interest, and that could affect their credit rating as well.
It's exactly. It's not pretty.
But Alex, it goes back to something you said earlier. That is one of the main reasons why Ghana is having issues is, and your question was how people who didn't even have the money in the first place, how do they pay it back? Ghana is having problems because they have very low revenue. They have very low revenue base. They're not able to raise enough revenue to meet their debt payments. A lot of these bonds pay interest semi-annually. Every 6 months or so, you have to make payments on the interest. If it's an interest-bearing bond, if it's a coupon bond, you have to make coupon payments every 6 months or so. I know there's instances where you don't have to make coupon payments if you have a zero coupon bond, which is something that I heard. I heard of a couple of people. I think it was John Davis and the Minister of Finance trying to explain a inflation index bond one time on the radio, and I don't think those guys have ever seen what an inflation index bond looks like or how it's supposed to operate. But anyway, that's another story. But Ghana was having a problem because they couldn't make payments on the domestic debt. They couldn't make payments on the domestic debt, which is a major thing. Even though Liberia, we just saw the recent report from the IMF on Liberia. Liberia have been asking for waivers on meeting certain obligations to make their debt payments. They've been asking for, because they couldn't meet some of those obligations. They've been asking for waivers. The crazy thing is they come in the air, they say one thing to the people, and no one really check them. There's no real checking on some of the statements they're making to the general public. The whole issue of rice, that is something the government could have planned for if the government had the revenue base, if they had the ability to raise capital. They can go ahead and make the purchase themselves from the international market.
Yep.
They can use even futures contract as a way to kind of stop these kind of fluctuations in prices. And then, a guy said it yesterday on Costa's show. We have to pay special attention because when OPEC met recently and is saying they're going to cut back on oil supply, so the supply of one of the key commodities that we use in Liberia, oil, they're going to cut the supply and the demand is not going to change. We're going to end up with shortage come December or so.
Run out
what
of
the
gas
government
again.
should be doing right now is
that is
raising
something
money.
I read that too.
Yeah, so what the government should be doing right now
prices
is raising money to do that. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
No, I said that is something I read too. Just supporting what you're saying. Prices may go up.
Yep.
It's going to go up. Supply and demand. Simple. So this is where now, if the government has a good credit rating, and I see a question asking what is a CCC credit rating. It's like credit score. Credit score runs all the way up to 850. Someone with a credit score of 600 or let's say 500, we can consider that a C rating credit score. What that means, it means that it's going to be difficult for you to borrow money. If you do, in fact, manage to borrow money, the interest on the money you borrow is going to be extremely high because there's a relationship between the interest you're paying on the loan and your credit rating. That's why when Moody's, Fitch, or Standard & Poor's reduce the credit rating of a country, the sovereign debt rating, the country get pissed off because it's going to cost them more money now to borrow.
Yep.
So you have
it's the same with your credit card
rating
situation or borrowing, taking a mortgage or something. That when your credit scores are bad, you get to pay more, and or you get you're not attractive to banks to give you loans, or you get smaller amounts of stuff. Debt to income ratio and all kind of stuff that's factored in. So, but this one is at the country level.
Yep.
So they use this A plus rating, B and C plus kind of rating, which makes a country unattractive like Ghana is right now. And somebody was talking about Sri Lanka is. Yeah.
Go ahead, Alex.
I mean, Sylvester J was also talking about Sri Lanka is another example of mismanagement of loans borrowed, right? So. Like Ghana. I mean, we can't say whether Ghana mismanaged the loans, but
you can say it, Alex. You can say it. They mismanaged it. They bought new cars for their girlfriends. Alex. You can say it.
I'm not sure if they went that route, but but they did mismanage it. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, but Larry, you're talking about Liberia and stuff like that. I mean, if some of the things we've seen over and over, we we're not more than convinced that the elements of the government as a whole thrives on lies, right? Fixing stuff. For example, this rice crisis could have been dealt with. Now we're talking about $14 million or $11 million that is neither here nor there, which was supposed to be used to subsidize the importers of rice, which obviously it was not sustainable. But now today we are talking about where is this money? What's the accountability for this money? We know how the government's calculating inflation. We know how all these different money, 30 million gone in raise, 25 million gone, 16 billion, all these different things that are going. We're talking about roll fund money. We're talking about all these different monies that have gone to on accountability. So I mean, how will a country like Liberia leverage on bonds, issuing treasury bills in this development efforts, right? How does the government raise money? We have a country where even bringing in foreign direct investment, bringing in even Liberian investors into the country is a difficult thing, because money don't go behind bad places.
Yep.
As simple as that. You get your money, you want to go to a good place to make your profit. That's why you're putting your money in there. So so how do we turn it around, Larry? How do we turn this around?
All right.
You can turn it around, because a lot of the countries out there that have managed to turn it around, they did so in stages. Because at one time, the three tigers, the Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, were highly corrupt countries. They didn't have anything going for them. They managed to fight corruption and turn things around in the country. Botswana is about 56, 57 years old. They managed to turn things around through good governance. It first starts with meritocracy. Meritocracy is the process of putting people in position based on their abilities, not based on relationships. So you don't put someone in a Ministry of Finance because they are a family member to a high-level government official, and the person is completely incompetent in the position they're putting them in. That's you're not going to get anywhere. It's like I'm going to hire my brother Alex to become a surgeon simply because he's my brother and he knows nothing about brain surgery. He's going to kill somebody.
I'm going to kill somebody, my friend.
He's definitely going to kill somebody.
Certainly, I'm going to kill somebody.
Hey, look at the guy say,
he's willing to admit
gonna
it too,
sound
Gabriel.
that you're gonna kill somebody.
No matter how smart I am, you can't take
He's
me
being
into
honest.
into
He's
the
keeping
Now,
it real.
Bobby, I know that man. I know that man for a long time. That man will do a
I'm
good
going to
job
kill
on the
somebody. I'm
operation.
not a doctor. I know something else, but I didn't train for a doctor.
I mean, look,
Larry,
you
you're
also,
funny.
when you start winning the MCC compact, even though the MCC compact is not going to lead immediately to developing your country, but it shows the fact that they're using so many measurements on how well you're governing your country. If you start winning the MCC compact, it's a sign of things to come, because then you can bring in the sovereign debt rating agencies to take a look at your governance structure.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have very good rule of law. I said this the last time on the show. Take a look at the Ministry of Justice website. You have absolutely no information there. One of the most incompetent AGs I've seen in recent history. You still have the late, peace be to his ashes, AG still on the Ministry of Justice website. Chiru. If I'm looking at a country saying this is where I want to invest in, I want to take a look at the governance structure, the rule of law, I take a look at the Ministry of Justice website, I'm discouraged, because if I'm calling saying, can I speak to this person, and the person is deceased, it tells me that you guys are not ready for prime time. You're not ready for prime time. It's absolutely a disgrace. And I like the fact what my brother Joe Munyu is mentioning.
Yeah, that was a comment I was going to come to.
Go ahead,
can you put it on the board? Yeah, Joe Munyu's comment. Thank you for recognizing that.
Is that one?
Liberia also has the resource capacity of carbon credits, with the largest virgin forest in West Africa. This should be a no barrier. Carbon is set to make hundreds of millions of dollars on the carbon credit market. Larry can speak to that.
You can trade it. You need to have access to capital. That stuff you can trade, easily trade it. So you need to have a way to make your debt payments. You have to build your revenue base, build your rule of law, at the same time improving your credit rating so you can have access to the sovereign debt market. And for anyone who was looking at the phrase Euro bonds, to understand what that means, it just means being able to denominate a bond in a foreign currency. So you can have Euro dollars, you can have Euro bonds. It's just being able to raise capital in that particular market. That's what that Euro bond thing is. And Liberia doesn't have the ability to raise, not just Liberia, out of the 15 countries in ECOWAS, if I remember correctly, I think 5 of them have zero credit rating. And when you take a look at those 5 countries, they all have one thing in common: poor governance.
Poor leadership, poor governance.
Poor leadership, poor
So
governance.
what is the carbon credit thing that Manu was talking about?
You want to touch on that, Gabe?
Yeah. So essentially what a carbon credit is? It's funny. This is something that coming out of my bank as well. Like they creating deposit product around that as well right now. So what a carbon credit is to be able essentially from what we're experiencing right now with the climate.
It all has to do with the environment,
Right. So the global warming is happening right now, right? So carbon credit is the ability to be able to take some actions to prevent global warming, right?
Okay.
Now,
like what Ivory Coast is doing.
Yeah. So the $1 billion bond that Ivory Coast is issuing right now, the green bond, that's exactly what they plan to do with it, to take its steps to fight global warming, right?
And then
Now,
other people can, people can fund into that, right?
Exactly. And we
So-
can do that too.
So I know, that Joshua man said something about, and Larry was
You mean
trying
the
to allude
president?
to it.
You mean the president of Liberia, the Republic of
Mama, give me
Liberia?
turn back. Larry was trying to talk something about it. So,
Right.
that kind of statement that he made, how could Liberia leverage on that kind of statement the way Ivory Coast is doing? I think Larry or Gabriel, you touched on that one.
I can continue. So
Yeah, go ahead.
what the president's, I agree with him on that, but the reason why I don't think countries or other international body will take you seriously is because your other history of managing things haven't been so well. But let's say, give them the benefit of the doubt, give us the benefit of the doubt, where to say we were on the path that Ivory Coast is on, we could essentially issue our own green bond. Now it may not be as $1 billion, it could be a $200 billion or $500 million green bond, and we could earmark it to say the entire Moravia. What people don't talk about is that thing is underwater, right? Like that thing is underwater. You could say,
Yeah.
I'm raising $500 million to do a landfill, right? Or to push back the erosion of the sea that
The
is
erosion.
that is eating into that, right? So you could issue a bond essentially to do that across the coastline, right? Now, if we were in a good position, a lot of government or creditors will subscribe to that and say, hey, this is a great
Companies and-
initiative. These people, this country is well positioned to be able to pay back that debt, so we will subscribe to it like they did in the Ivory Coast. But we don't have that. It's like every time we talk about Liberia, sometimes you cringe. Like there's so like I agree with the guy here. What's his name? Monyu. That there's opportunity, but we're not leveraging on that. I will say this, and I will end right. There's also the ability to capture the carbon from the air, right, and deposit it, right. So there's that whole thing happening in Asia right now, where they're trading carbon credit. It is becoming a commodity. So a lot of banks are issuing that right now. It's becoming a commodity. We could partake in it. Our biggest excuse, bigger advantage, we have one of the biggest green rainforests, right? That
Rainforest,
is
yeah.
untouched, and there's so much opportunity, but so less knowledge and the willingness to bring in the right people to do the right thing. And
Yeah, but like
seriousness.
Larry said, Gabriel, if you let's put it in the football arena, right? If you're coach of one of my favorite teams. I got two favorite teams, Arsenal and
Fine.
no, and the other Spanish thing, Real
Barcelona.
Madrid.
Real Madrid. Okay.
If you're giving in that kind of league, right? That kind of tough league, and you have a coach, and you have team A, team B, team C, up to team H,
Mm.
and you decide to want to play Barcelona,
Mm.
and you bring in team F or G,
To play
you're
team
gonna get
A.
defeated.
Yeah.
Because your team A has the highest rating, team B in that order, team B, team C.
Right.
So if you form a government after that as a coach of a football team, and you bring your least rated players in team H and F, or your team, your players in training, right? And you bring them to play Barcelona or to play Bayern Munich in a European, obviously you're gonna get walked over, right? But so if you're in that kind of league, if you bring in your team A, team B, or your mixture of team A, B, and some little C here and there, and then the other people that are in training will come on later on. Not that they won't come on, but they will come on, when the place is getting solid and stuff like that. And
Right.
when the game is getting to a certain point, then you can bring those players in, on a going basis. So like Larry was talking about, governance and stuff like that. If you have that kind of situation, how do you have people with that knowledge who will leverage this kind of stuff we're talking about in carbon credit and direct foreign investment and bonds and
one of the things in the States, in Europe, and in parts of Asia, when they put out a job posting, they make sure that the person, first of all, they set aside a hiring team. Usually in government entities, there'll be a 3-panel team to interview you. And then they make sure that the department where you're reporting to, you don't have a relative or a family member who is in that department or who leads that department, meaning they're going to have some influence on you being selected. So that's an important thing, to make sure that you're putting people who are highly qualified in tight position. This was what Singapore, when Lee Kuan Yew, and you talked about this, I remember on a previous show, Alex, when Lee Kuan Yew came in, he made sure that you were putting qualified people in positions where they were qualified for. Look at the fiasco we saw trying to hire people over for the international airport, for RIA. It was a big fiasco. You have someone who had no business, who didn't meet the minimum qualification to land in that position, but yet there were people in the Senate who were arguing for this person. It was bizarre. I've never seen it before. But that's one way to do it. Again, there are a couple of things that, when you look at the data, a couple of things that stands out. Find one country on earth where you don't have the rule of law in place, and show me that this country has developed. I would tip my hat. It's never going to happen. You need to have the rule of law. You can't
give me
rely on the
$500,
US
I can name a
government to
country.
sanction your people to show that. I'm sorry, buddy. Go ahead.
You give me $500, I can name a country.
Even the United Kingdom at one time, with all the pirates and stuff, those guys were highly corrupt, but eventually they got their act together. That's why the United Kingdom became such a superpower, and they were able to conquer so many and set up so many colonies out there. That's another story. But you need a rule of law. You need meritocracy. You need to develop your financial sector. So important. And I like what Joe Money mentioned, because you have to start thinking, you need to start thinking, and I hate this phrase, out of the box, but you need people who are innovative. You need people who are innovative, who can think on solution to solve some of the big, heavy problems out there. The diaspora will play a major role. Why? Because FDIs, foreign direct investments, the diaspora is a great source to sell your sovereign debt bonds. American buys a ton of U.S. debt. They purchase a ton. I mentioned, go to Treasury Direct. And the reason why they're buying U.S. debt, because it's AAA credit rating. If you're an older person, you want to buy bonds because you don't want to take a whole lot of risk. If you're a younger person, you want to buy equities or stock because there's a high chance that you have a longer period of time before you retire. So you want to buy equities, you want to buy stocks because you can wait it out. Because in the long run, stocks eventually tends to rise in value, not unless you buy some shady company called like Iboma MF who is putting stock out there. Then that's another story all by itself. Right? But definitely get your meritocracy in place, get your rule of law in place, make sure you have a strong financial sector in place, build financial instruments. Make sure you see regulatory agencies like over here in the US, you have the SEC, you have FINRA, you have all of these other associations to make sure things are done right. And look what happened in 2010 at the end of the financial crisis when Americans discovered that, hey, there was something shady going on. They passed a law, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, written by Chris Dodd, the guy from Connecticut, and Barney Frank, the guy from Massachusetts. That was an important piece of legislation that came about because at the end of the Depression here in the U.S., there was a law that was passed called the Glass-Steagall Act. That law was on the books up until around 1999 when it was repealed. They took it off the books. And it made it possible for companies like J.P. Morgan, an investment bank, to merge with a commercial bank. At that time, there was this guy from Detroit. He stood up on the floor and he said, look, repealing the Glass-Steagall Act is going to lead to something called too big to fail. And sure enough, it didn't take too long for that to happen in 2007 when you had Lehman Brothers and all these major investment banks failing, right? But how did the U.S. adjust to that? They came out with the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act to deal with that. Look at all the fiasco in Liberia. Have we come up with any serious legislation to deal with some of the criminality going on? No. So you're not going to develop unless you fix your legal system. And this one lady name, I don't want to go too far off the tangent, but look at the justice system. And I keep hearing Costa talk about this lady named Eva Mappin Morgan. How she stole a businessman money or allegedly stole millions of dollars from a business.
Yeah,
and yet, even
allegedly
stole, right? Even though the Supreme Court said in a way that she needs to repay the money, where is the Ministry of Justice to have this woman arrested?
So technically, that is she's found guilty if they tell her to pay back the money.
To pay it back.
But you didn't arrest her; she's out there free,
She's
and
out
she's
there. How are you going to bring
said,
foreign direct investment to your
just
country? How are you going to have good governance and win the Millennium Challenge Corporation grants when you have this kind of fiasco? That's what I'm saying. The AG, he lacks the kahunas to get the job done. You know, I don't know. Yo, man.
Gabriel, let me take
I
you
see
back
why
to your,
Gabriel get headache when you talk about Liberia.
I know. As we conclude, we got 15 more minutes. As we conclude, let me take you back to the timeline on your slide. Could you walk us through that timeline? I know we've talked a lot about bonds and stuff like that, but I think that timeline will sort of summarize. And then once we do that, then you can go to your summary sheet. Once we do the timeline, then you can go to your last sheet, which is summary sheet. Can you walk through that and summarize, as we conclude?
All right. So this one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me enlarge this. So I think we, at some point, we did talk about this, right? So if a country wanted to issue bonds, let's say they do have some infrastructure, either bridge they want to build or, road network they want to build, there's typically a timeline here, the first being the approach to operation. So pretty much you talk to banks or creditors about the need for raising financing. So I think I gave an example to that. So let's say if you're in Liberia, you wanted to, raise $500 million for, the environment to combat the erosion of the water. You go to Larry. Larry is the bookie, bookie meaning there's the investment bank, and say, Larry, we want to raise $500 million. So you talk to the banks, and the banks will say, okay. After that, Larry will say, hey, do you have a credit rating, right? So now if you don't, you start talking to the rating agency. What are the things you have to do to get a credit rating? Because based on the credit rating, that's how investors will be able to assess the level of risk associated with the country, in this case, as our examples, Liberia, right? So after that, once that is determined, you decide how much you want to raise. You say $500 million. Now the onus is on you, Alex. You say, okay, I've decided how much I want to raise. I'm going to take this thing on the road. So you pretty much is a marketing is a marketing. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, very loud.
Okay. So in other words, this is a marketing roadshow that you put it on. So you're going to market it to, let's say, hey, you could say I'm going to the diaspora in America, the UK, or everywhere there's Liberian. But also I want to market this thing to other international bodies or other countries as well. So you pretty much take this thing on a roll. You present the bonds to investors on the roadshow. You talk about the spread. The spread means the interest rate that they're going to be getting on the investment. You talk about how long the duration. You could say 30 years, or we're going to do this thing for 25 or 20 years. And you talk about some of the risk on the roadshow. Those are some of the things you'll be talking about. And all of this, all you're doing, you want to engage investor sentiment in terms of how likely they are to subscribe to the bond that you're trying to issue, which is the debt, right? Then after that, you place the bond on the market. Say this is now, you raise whatever you want to raise, you place this thing on the market, you watch the market participation, and the bank, will advise the issuer, which is you, about the price, based on how much you raise or how much subscription you have, right? Then the next thing to do is
so that meaning that supply and demand can cause the prices to go down up.
I think Larry did mention that. So
I was quoting from Larry.
Exactly. So all of that could factor into in terms of the price, and even also how longer you want to extend this thing to people, right? So I think the last step in that is, as I said, you could say you want to raise 500 million, but based on the subscription, I could say I want this amount. Based on the subscription, you could say, hey, we weren't able to raise $500 million, or we weren't able to have this many people subscribe to it to raise $500 million. So we're going to sell you this amount so much just for the sake of that, just to make sure that everybody who subscribed do get a portion of this. In essence, what you're trying to do, let me take this thing down. In essence, what you're also trying to do, you don't want, the reason why you can determine the how much a creditor gets, you don't want one person being exposed to you too much, because if they expose, let's say I come in and buy 60% of the entire offering, guess what? I now dictate to you what happens on that bond. Like if things happen, I have the single loudest voice to determine how things will play out. So
I have majority.
Exactly. So in that case, you determine how much each individual gets based on how much they say they want to subscribe, because you don't want to be too exposed to one person or one group of investors for too long, because that could impact you. As I always use the case with Puerto Rico, right next door, $70 billion, since 2014, those people are still in court chopping it up with their investors. The US could do them a favor and say, hey, this is a US territory, or technically another state. We could get them out, but they left them hanging, and those people have been hanging for a long time, and they're still there right now. So that's pretty much the timeline to issuing a bond. It's if you're in a finance world, it's a beautiful thing to watch. There's a lot that goes into it, and like, if you want to see mean people in finance, talk to people that trade bonds. They are the meanest people. They don't play about the money. One penny, they will come after you for every single penny. So, all right, yeah.
We had to redesign our system because the Bank of Japan, when we did our reconciliation at the end of the night, and we were off by a penny. Bank of Japan, the Japanese guys, they didn't want to hear it. We had a tolerance level. If there's a difference when we're doing some reconciliation, we would just say, okay, it's under $25. Let's just let it slide. But the Japanese weren't having that.
Even
we had to
0.01.
redesign the system to fix that. But one thing Gabriel said that is so important is taking the show on the road. And this is why I mentioned early on that I saw John Davis and the Minister of Finance trying to explain something called a inflation index bonds. They were trying to explain that. But before I touch on that real quick, one thing. Let me ask you guys a question. Will you buy Liberian issued bonds if you knew that inflation was going to rise? So let me put it another way. Say, for example, I'm going to issue a bond for $100. The interest rate on the bond is, let's say, 10%, right? At the end of the maturity, the bond matures in 1 year. You would get $110, right? So here's the thing now. What if inflation were to rise?
So
the value of my money is going to go down that I get at the end of the period.
Thank you. Hey.
That's the problem, because
they have the inverse relationship, right?
Yeah, there's an inverse relationship. It's because of that inverse relationship. It's because of the risk of inflation in the country. That's why you don't have you don't have a mortgage market, because you cannot issue mortgage loans for 10 years, because within that 10 years, inflation can rise.
Yeah.
And the bank would, in essence, be losing money, because they would have loaned you the money, let's say at around, say, 7%. Inflation has risen substantially. So the money they're getting back from you is worth less than what it should actually be worth. That's why it's so weird. In Liberia, personal loans have a lower interest rate than some mortgage loans, which is weird. Personal loans have lower interest rates. But because inflation here in the US have been consistently at around, say, 2.25%, I mean, recently now it's been kind of out of whack. That's why it's so easy for banks to lend 15-year, 30-year mortgages, because they know interest rate is going to remain kind of at a constant. We don't have that situation in Liberia. To the point Gabriel made about taking a show on the road, they were trying to sell something called inflation index bond. What that means is, using the example of the $100.
The government of Liberia?
The government of Liberia, right? Over here in the US, we started doing it back. The US started doing it back in, I believe, the late 90s. It's called TIPS, TIPS, Treasury Inflationary Protected Securities, right? And if you go to Treasury Direct, you can find it. All of these bonds have what is called a QSIP. It's a 9-digit specific code that makes it possible for you to find a specific bond. Even the World Bank issued bonds. Their QSIP starts with 45, so on and so forth. They were trying to take that show on the road to explain inflation index bonds, but I'm not sure how much they have worked in investment bank to understand.
So who they were bringing this thing to now?
They were trying to sell it to Liberian people, so Liberian people can buy inflation index bonds. But they have zero. I don't remember them, because when I went to the CDL website, I don't remember seeing any subscription to it, right? So it didn't do extremely well. I wouldn't have sold it in Liberia mainly. Based on what Gabriel said, I probably would have brought it to the diaspora. But the problem with selling it in the diaspora is you have to abide by the U.S. securities laws. So the shady stuff that you do back in your little Liberia, when you start violating U.S. securities laws, Uncle Sam can have you brought over here and arrested. That is why, and Alex, you're going to love this. Wait for it. That is why the former minister of Mozambique is about to get arrested and brought to the U.S. for violating U.S. securities laws, because he floated, I don't know, it was $1 or $2 billion in some Euro bonds and used the U.S. banking system as a means to launder some out money. That's why he's been sitting in prison over in South Africa for a number of years, waiting to be brought to New York to be tried for money laundering and a whole lot of other financial misgivings.
Did these people really try to sell those bonds to Liberians?
They were trying to sell it. Yeah. That's a video out there. I saw it. Someone sent it over to me. Say, "Yeah, Mr. Larry Kennedy, I want you to watch this. Enjoy." And the person was being sarcastic.
In fact,
something.
From the beginning of the government, from the beginning of the Liberian government, there was a case that we worked on at $1.8 billion.
It's not going to work, because the government cannot afford it. Number one. It's a good idea to tie bonds directly to inflation. So meaning, if inflation increases by 2 percentage points, the bond will also increase the interest rate that is given back to you just to kind of balance inflation. So that way you're never losing your initial investment. It's a great, fantastic idea. Great, fantastic idea. People, it's done here in the US all the time. But they didn't know how to really, really explain it. And they couldn't explain how much it was going to cost the government of Liberia, how much the government of Liberia was going to benefit, and all that other stuff in the background. So,
Now, I was saying that from the beginning of the government of Liberia, this government, because the government was all over the place looking for money, there was this case with $1.8 billion that some scammers was trying to put on them. And
this current administration?
We had to erect the proper advisory from our vantage point of view, and yet and stay. Sometimes you try to explain these things, and they want to pursue the situation. But I mean, we kind of fought hard, and that kind of stuff was squashed. But William King has a response to the question you asked me about inflation. He said you can put his comment on the board there.
Is that the one that he directed, Larry?
Yeah, I would buy Liberian's bond if I knew the rate factor.
It's 2 or 3 down.
This one or the?
No, the other one. No,
the other one.
There's one he said I would buy Liberian bond if I knew the rate factor in inflation.
Okay, I see it. Yeah, he said I would buy a Liberian bond if I knew
the rate factor in inflation.
In inflation.
So if you go to the central bank's website, the central bank there's a listing in terms of the interest rate or the yield that is being paid on government of Liberia bonds. It's not consistent. There's something weird about the numbers in there because what's the development bank we have in Liberia, man?
Agricultural Development Bank or something?
No, the one with that Jadis used to run.
LBDI.
LBDI. Because even LBDI, which is weird, LBDI is actually subscribing to government of Liberia bonds, meaning LBDI is lending money to the government of Liberia. Is that what LBDI was for? I mean,
that bank has always had this weird relationship. The last time I checked their balance sheet when they used to put out their financial statement was in 2008. They stopped putting that out. Maybe they resumed putting that out now. But their biggest creditor on their balance sheet was the government of Liberia. I mean, huge. This bank was so highly leveraged that, if people understood what was going on that balance sheet, they would do a bank run on it. But people just glance over it and nobody said anything. It's like huge amount of debt. That was the last time I checked it, 2018. Up to now.
Where does LBDI get the money from that is deposited in LBDI?
That's a great
They
question.
have citizens depositing, right? Citizens do deposit money in LBDI. Was that what LBDI was initially meant for? Not, right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be like a quasi-institution, like you showed on one of your earlier publication.
Right.
Quasi-institution here in the U.S. is like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the FFCB, which is the Federal Farm Credit Bank. Things like Sallie Mae is no longer a quasi-institution. Sallie Mae is the Student Loan Mortgage Association. They were really there to try to help facilitate student loans, but now they're a private entity. LBDI was meant to be an institution that was focused mainly on development, right? But I'm not sure where they kind of went away from that and doing something that is not part of their mandate. But again, that's Liberia. So be it, right? Well, again, to answer quickly William King's question, if you go to the central bank's website, the data is there. The reason why I say it's kind of funny, because when you look at who is receiving payments, some banks, it's not consistent. Some banks appear to be receiving a little bit more payments than other banks for the exact same issuance. It's kind of weird, but take a look at the central bank's website. The data is out there for you to look at.
Yeah. I don't think I would.
Gentlemen, so that was a good discussion in terms of what we're trying to do is to see how government can leverage bonds for development, and touching on the giving Liberia as of course we get Ivory Coast and Ghana as an example, but we're trying to see how Liberia could do some of those stuff and some of the challenges that we have as a country, and how how we can resolve that. But again, we hear that we can resolve that through good governance, enforcing the rule of law, and fighting corruption and things like that. So we can boost, and then of course that will result into attracting foreign direct investment, and of course it lead to bonds issuance and central bank treasury bills and stuff like that. So who wants to go first in concluding?
Let me conclude quickly before I bounce out of here. And I'm going to conclude by touching on William King's last post out there. So he says the Liberian Treasury bills issued in 2019-20 was a great deal because money was made, and also the LRD became a bit stronger against the US dollar, albeit there is some inconsistency. So here's my thing, Brother King. First of all, I don't believe the data coming on the Liberian dollar. It's so shady. Because when you take a look at the Central African franc, right? The Central African franc lost value against the US dollar, the DXY, right? The Naira also wasn't strengthened against the US dollar, the Leon, the CDs, and all major currencies. Somehow the Liberian dollar strengthened when all these other economies, Nigeria has the largest economy over there in Africa. All these economies didn't do too well against the US dollar, except the Liberian dollar. How is that possible? Well, we really didn't have any growth. Remember now, you said 2019, 2020. From 2018 all the way up to the end of 2020, the total development in the country, the total GDP in the country dropped. It grew from 2016 to 2017, it grew, but by the time it hit 2018, the total production, total goods and services being produced, it fell in 2019, 2018, 19, and 20, 36 months in a row. How can you have a falling GDP at the same time your currency is strengthening? They're cooking the books, man. I just don't trust some of the data that come from those guys. And maybe William King, you're my man. Maybe I'm being cynical, Larry Cynical Kennedy, you can say that. But I just don't trust it, considering the Central African franc didn't do too well, and some other currencies didn't do too well. But yet the Liberian currency just kind of strengthened all of a sudden. So again, gentlemen, always great.
No, Larry, let me hold you there. You're not being cynical. Because some of the things that are happening in our country and some of the data that are coming up, it defeats normal economics factors, right? You can't have a country where we claim that inflation is going down, but when prices are going up, right?
Thank you, brother
work
Alex.
like that. Economics don't work like that. So we know that the way the inflation is being calculated is wrong because it's indexed to the Liberian dollars. We know that. Different people, there have been different arguments even in Liberia about this, and there have been different debates. Different people came together, and I don't want to call names here, but I know that, and I've been privy to some conversation and stuff like that, and there's the overwhelming agreement that the way the Liberian dollar, the way the inflation is being calculated is wrong. So it's tilted towards satisfying IMF. Right? And then you come to an exchange rate. The exchange rate, like you're trying to say, over Liberia has been consistent at about 150, 155 thereabout. If I'm not mistaken, at least over the last year or more. And when you have, this is economic factor, this is market factors in every country. Even today, the euro, the British pound is struggling against the US dollars. Serious economy.
And the Liberian dollar getting stronger. The British pound sterling is weakening.
It's constant.
And the LRD is getting stronger.
Right. LRD is getting stronger when big economies are struggling. Especially in this time of the aftermath of the almost aftermath of COVID-19, and now we're talking about Ukrainian war. So it beats all imagination, my friend. So, like you said, I wouldn't even, I would be amazed if somebody says something is not done in terms of cooking the book to satisfy the IMF. Because what you give the IMF is what they're going to take. Because for them, they have the cushion of adjusting all the time. So they have their own cushion. So they would take all the data you gave them. If it's not working, they would say, okay, the company was expected to grow at 5%, but we double down on it. It's going to grow at 3%. Or then we come back again. Oh, there will be negative growth at a negative 2%. Right? They have the flexibility of doing all that stuff. So
they rely,
Mr. King. I think
know
you got to come back here.
On the
you got to
IMF
come on the show
prediction.
and talk some of these things that you're talking about.
The IMF have been consistently wrong in some of their predictions. The IMF predicted the Liberian economy was going to grow in 2012. The IMF said the Liberian economy was going to grow in 2013, 14, 15. By December of 2013, by December of 2013, Ebola came into the country. There are so many things that can impact how well your country is going to do. Ebola came in, decimated the economy. IMF predictions should have pay closer attention to what was going on, because look at what's happening right now with Ebola coming back again in Uganda. Statistically, after Ebola in 1976 hit the Congo, every country that had more than 2 people that died from Ebola has always returned in that country. So when IMF made predictions, sometimes you have to question it, right? Because the people who are making some of these predictions, they don't stay in a position long enough to see the outcome, to see if they can get held for the predictions they've made. They also predicted that the Liberian economy was going to do extremely well come 2020, 2021, 2022. By March of 2020, COVID hit. Remember now, in 2019, 2018, there was some prediction that IMF put out there saying the economy was going to grow 6%. I saw it floating all over the internet. Oh, the economy is going to grow 6%. Well, by March of 2020, COVID became, it decimated the economy, became a pandemic, and it changed all of the numbers. Now, here they are again making another prediction that the economy is going to do 5%, 6%, 7%. Wait a second. Where are you guys? It's absolute nonsense. That's why we say, look, in God we trust. Everybody else, let me see your data. And show me where you're getting your data from. You know what I mean?
That's a great phrase.
I'll just leave it right there and swing it over to Gabriel and you, Alex.
No, I think you guys did a good job responding to Larry. Not Larry, William. I think we all saying the same thing. It's you can't. There's just fundamentally from our economic standpoint.
I'm cutting you off, Gabriel, but let me throw just funny one. You say the Liberian are getting stronger. When the money I used to send to Liberia, I almost have to double the money. That means the $100 I used to send, the goods that the $100 can get now is
not
less.
Anymore.
So I have to double that money. To send it so that they can get the same amount of goods. Then you say the Liberian dollar is getting stronger. Please.
The only country in Africa whose currency I know outperformed was Zambia. Besides that, I don't know of any other country, and that's because Zambia did HLM did a great job transforming our country in a matter of a year since she took over. I think they're on track to become the next country we start talking about besides Rwanda. So, but besides that, every other country, there's, not just in Liberia, forget Africa, the whole Central America right now, the last time that happened, I think we always say this on this show, was in 20 years ago when the US dollar starts strengthening. Like, there are countries that fall in terms of like that struggle economically. The whole entire South America countries, it happened to them. And all of a sudden, and these are countries that are producing, the Brazil, the Argentina, Liberia, we don't even have one production, and yet we say our currency is strengthening against the US dollars. I mean, even if you didn't know that, just forget the data. Just from that typical worldview, you should start scratching your head that there's something wrong here, But as I said, you can rely on data, or you can maybe you're getting your data from somewhere else. Like Alex said, come on the show. Let's talk about that one of these shows.
For me, I want to close with a Tabata.
Typical crew, man.
I heard former president. I can address her as former president.
I
can call her name and say president.
Yeah.
I heard, but I heard her say it.
I know where you're going with that. You kept emphasizing that, but I know where you're going. Keep going.
But I heard her on an interview on the radio in Liberia, and one thing that caught I started listening to it late, but one thing that caught my attention when she said that, Liberians, you can run away to America, you can go to the diaspora. When something happen in the country, then you come and you run away. I'm like, okay, where is she going with that? So Larry, I know it sounds like it sounds like Tabata to me.
Mm. So the former
Because
president
When
said that.
if for example, I put myself in the case when you run me away from my own country, how do you expect me to stay there? When you don't create an environment, the enabling environment for people to thrive, what do you expect for people to do? Right? So
You know
it
what I would
happens
say
all
to
over the
that?
world. I mean, there are different countries. For example, when Ghana was in trouble with as a failed country economically, like the Ghanaians left. But when Rollins came into power in the early 90s and he started fixing the country, I was living in Ghana then. Ghanaians started coming back in the drove. All right. Today you see Ghana, then the embassy started giving them 5-year, multiple year visa, 10 years, because now their economy started getting improved. Ghanaians were coming back. They were engaging in different business activities and different, so they were going back and forth. Now, during my Ellen's first term in 2006, 2007, 2008, you saw Liberians going back in their drove for different reasons. Some people were catching in their 401k, taking their home equity loan, playing their susu and going back to do business and stuff like that. But what happened?
It's a reverse.
Between starting from after 4 years, going to 5 years of her term, there was a reverse. So Liberians started coming back. And then we have the situation we have now where, insecurity is a problem, economic, no opportunities. Even, because you're talking about even, you could, even if you don't have a job, you can stay in the country and do business. But what business will you do when the environment itself is not acceptable for you to do your little business and earn your own living? Government have to provide that. That's government's duty to its citizens, to provide the environment, to ensure that security is in place, to ensure that there's good governance, to ensure that there's the rule of law, to ensure that there's not a lot of corruption. You carry your 50,000 in the country, you want to make business, somebody want to take 25,000 from you off the back. How do you do your business? So the guy will run back to somewhere else. I mean, not only U.S., people going to Ghana, people going to Sierra Leone, Liberians are running away, to finding a way. It's like other countries where Ghana is an example back in the day. So it's just not Liberia alone. So that other statement there for me, that Tabata.
Yeah. I mean, when
That's
did
my
she say that?
conclusion.
Recently?
Yeah, just I think a day or two ago.
I mean, that's true. I mean, that's I don't want to name names, but there's a lot of Liberians that used to be back there that are here now. They don't want to go back. And it's all of the reason why you pointed out. As I always say, right now, I think Larry, either you or Larry mentioned that earlier. Right now, we can't even attract even the Liberian that want to invest to go back in Liberia to invest, let alone attracting foreign investors in there. So that should tell you a lot about the country. Now
You saw.
imagine
I'm not
me.
cutting you up, but you saw when you. I was in Liberia. You saw George Weah's inauguration. The first few months of George Weah rule, this from his inauguration, that stadium was crowded.
Huh.
There were Liberians from all walks that flew into the country,
Right.
that thought that there was a dawn of the new day. Their Messiah had arrived. But within 6 months, a lot of people came from diaspora that went back home for an opportunity, not just jobs. A lot of Liberians went home for different reasons.
Right.
The same way when Ellen got to power in 2000, when she was inaugurated in 2006, between 2006 to 2009, 10, there were a flock of Liberians going back home for different reasons. It's the same thing that happened. Liberians left. Liberians want to go home of different ages. There are a lot of Liberians that have retired that are in this place that want to go home. There are a lot of young Liberians, there are a lot of middle-aged Liberians that want to go home. But you think I wanted to leave my investment I have in Liberia that that value a lot. I don't want to call it value, but I wanted to,
I'm here, right?
I wanted to, yes, and I have a stay in the States. I could come back and forth, come back and forth. A lot of Liberians that want to do that, but you don't provide environments. Then you have insecurity in the state. You have unresolved murders, and stuff like that. So it's going to be difficult until we as a country we change that paradigm. We don't want to, because what she was trying to say was, in the light of, trying to speak for our country, trying to, take the good news of our country, not to beat our country down. And I subscribe to that. But how do you thrive in a country when the enabling environment is not being provided? It's going to be tough. And how do you speak well of your country when you're not giving that teeth to bite? Yeah, we are lobbyists and all running away from all the NER contracts.
Yeah. That is funny.
We should have made that the tabata at the opening.
Lobbyists are that's another tabata. So you can speak to that.
That is funny.
But no, great discussion. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, you guys spend a lot of time there, maybe so you can speak to that. So why that always? So it seemed like a cycle. Ellington, people went and then they ran away. President Weir's time, people went and then now they're out of there, right? So for me, I think the only thing I can attribute to that is the killings. Like once you go in the country, people start killing and nothing happening. Hey, I don't feel safe. I will leave. That's the only thing I can attribute it to. But it seems like to that there's a trend. There's a trend in Ghana. The state there is 5,000 African American in Ghana right now. Like there's this trend that is going. I think the NBC or the ABC did a thing on it. They went there to film that to see why most African American are moving over there. Crane, like they show the city, that cranes going up, people are developing, and people are building. Why we can't be like that, But I think
one of the reasons why that is happening, Ghana has a policy that is specifically geared to attract African Americans to Ghana.
Right.
We don't have a policy like that in place in Liberia. In fact, another reason why you don't see a whole lot of foreign direct investment, besides the fact that, the governance issue and all that stuff. But another reason why you don't see foreign direct investments going to Liberia is because we don't have a policy specifically geared to attract FDI. A lot of countries are part of an organization. I can't think of the name. It's some association that deals with foreign direct investments. They actually have offices in the US and offices in the UK that is designed specifically to attract foreign direct investments. The US has offices over in Europe and in Latin America that deal specifically with attracting foreign direct investments. We don't have an office set up like that to attract foreign direct investments or to attract African Americans. The government was relying on foreign lobbyists. When you look at the lobbying contract they had with Strom, the lobbying contract they had with Bakari Sellers, right, and some of the other lobbying contracts. In those contracts, it says specifically the lobbyist was going to try to connect African Americans to make them to go to Liberia. They were relying on lobbyists are not financiers. They are not very good at. They're not business people. Well, they're in business to make money for themselves,
right?
But we needed to set something up that is specifically geared to attract African Americans to the country. And the way you do that, you look at the tourism sector, you look at other things that African Americans are interested in, the healthcare sector. African Americans not going to go in Liberia
running water.
You have such a shady healthcare system. You don't have no ambulance or anything like that. So we don't have a policy specifically geared. That's why I'm glad you guys mentioned, Gabriel, you mentioned African Americans are in going to Ghana in droves because they have a policy geared to attract them. We don't have one.
Right now, between now, October and March, you go to Gambia. There's a drove of Europeans, people from different countries. US, they're in the country right now. That's their tourism time between now, October and March of the following year. There's a lot. The place is crowded with people, and they make a lot of money. Right.
Don't worry, we'll
soon
get
some
there.
of these things.
We'll soon get there. We'll get there.
Anytime between now and never. I'll see you guys later, man.
See you guys. Thank you guys
Yeah.
for a good show.
So
Thank
as
you,
we
Gilbert.
always say,
Thank
guys,
you, Larry.
thank you for joining us. It's been another great session. Join us next week, same time, 3:00, and we will have a topic out hopefully by midweek. But it's been a pleasure, and as we always say, we always have conversation to move the needle of our democracy just an inch better than what we left it. Right. So, regardless of what we say here, one thing that remains a common denominator is that we're all Liberians, and that will never change. So thank you for spending time with us. We look forward to seeing you next Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Ciao.
guys.
Yeah.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home. Liberia people.